I feel like we'll just start like this. Like you and I send each other like 10-minute long voice notes. So it was about time that we did a podcast together.
Mini podcast, daily mini podcast.
We've done like many mini podcasts.
Yeah.
So today I have Julia with me, and Julia is like one of my favorite people. She's like a sister, and I'm so grateful that I'm in London right now and I get to interview you for your first podcast ever, official podcast.
First ever podcast. Yes. Well, actually, you were also the mini ones too, so it makes sense.
Exactly. It does make sense,
Yeah.
right? I'm like your first interviewer.
Yes.
Definitely not the last. Actually, you have done stuff before, but not like in this type of setting.
No. Yeah. What have I done?
I don't know. I've seen like some reels on Instagram.
Yes. Yeah.
And you've done like Zoom podcasts, I guess.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Zoom interviews, but
I know. So you are a spiritual psychotherapist, and I wanted to share a little bit more about that because I feel like you're basically combining two what seems opposites together, like spirituality and psychotherapy. And what does that mean, and how does that look like in practice?
Yeah, so it's a very literal name I've chosen for my Instagram, but I guess it gives you an idea. I wouldn't say that they are opposites, because for me, the reason I've combined them is because they sort of are a beautiful marriage. They're just two languages to sort of, in many ways and many times, it's describing the same thing, but some of us are just more logically inclined and others are more spiritually inclined. And I guess in my work, I've found that what they have in common, I guess the common grain is that it's a choosing to know yourself. It's a choosing of coming back home to yourself. It's, I'm unhappy, I'm coming to the therapist. You know, I've gotten to this point and I need to come back to myself. Something's not working. So by definition, I'm curious. And okay, depends how you approach that. You can come to the therapist and only want to complain or talk about how your husband is, you know, terrible. And you can do that, but you will find over time that you won't move much until you start going this way. And that's where it is a spiritual practice, whether you are calling it that or not. Now, if you are spiritually inclined and we can begin to sort of talk in that way, I think that the beauty of that is you connect to something larger than yourself. That to me is where psychotherapy kind of can be this beautiful coming home process, but it will find its plateau. And I don't want to say that it's not a beautiful tool, but that extra step of understanding that there is something larger at work and that we are connected to everything and everyone around us, and that there's so many layers to this existence that we don't know about, and how that fits into your experience, to your unhappiness, to what you sought in the psychotherapy. That to me is where now we've reached something else. Now you have a different platform to work with, and then it's truly infinite. So I suppose they really feed each other. If that
They're
if that makes sense.
complementary. I love that you said it's like a marriage.
Yes.
Yes. And sometimes marriage do have like components of opposites in some areas, but then there's also like things that are very complementary. And in this case, both practices are complementary. I do find as well that with psychotherapy, sometimes you do reach a plateau, and I didn't go down the psychology route at all. Mine was quite different. But I remember even with like my health coaching, I had reached a plateau, and I was like, without the spiritual component, the changes and the growth that I was looking for were not necessarily taking place. It was really when I started to see myself as part of a larger ecosystem that my life started to change, and the way that I perceived myself started to change. And you start to also realize the experiences that came into your life and how they're serving you, even though they were difficult to go through and they had their challenges, why perhaps that was there and where it's guiding you towards. So do you find with the people that come to you, what are the main things they come to you for? Like, do you feel like there's kind of a common thread in between all of that? And what is it?
Well, it's funny. It's a question I get a lot. It's like, what do you specialize in? I get
Mm,
that question all the time. And because, you can specialize children, eating disorders, whatever you gravitate towards. But haven't thus far. Well, I guess I have because of these sort of specifications. But I kind of answer generally like it's the human condition. And something you're kind of making me think of is victim consciousness. And I will say that because it is a more spiritual term to think of it that way. The biggest risk with psychotherapy, and now my training would not appreciate this.
but we're here to be challenging these things, right? We have to.
Absolutely, because you can see your therapist for 10 years, 20 years. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're spending all of that time talking about how, this is because my father was absent, and are you just telling the same story over and over and over about how you are a victim of X, Y, and Z? It's not to say that that's not valid. So I kind of like to see it as we need to acknowledge the victim, because a lot of times what's happening or we're running around with is, I'm burnt out, I'm unhappy, I'm anxious all the time, I don't know why I don't love my partner anymore, or why I can never attract a partner, or why I hate men, or all of that. And what is needed is a connection in with what's been wounded. Okay, so we do have to acknowledge the victim. There is almost always going to be a child in there that's not doing well. She's or he is wounded by many different things, by their own interpretations of what's gone on, and they are walking around with that suffering. But it's been layered over with so much conditioning, so much shame. Shame is a huge one. It just sits on top of everything else. And so we do have to work with that, with those feelings, to acknowledge this being inside. But once we kind of start to unravel this, sometimes my clients can get a little, wiggly about
Triggered.
it, because it's sort of like, okay, this is your story. It's been your story until now, but now what? This is sort of the whole thing of, yes, you were a victim of abuse. Yes, like this is all real and it has to be acknowledged. But now your job in this lifetime is to transmute that into something else. It's to heal yourself. That's your job, because you can't go back. You may never get the apology that you're seeking. It's that closure is an internal job that can be worked through with therapy. But this is then where the spiritual understanding of that can be a little bit more potent, I suppose, when you start thinking of someone as a soul who's coming in, who's here to have these experiences, which sometimes suck.
Mm-hmm.
They really suck. And they're traumatic. And you're thinking, I would have never chosen this. But you did. You did on some level. And that means you have the power to do something with it. This was part of your soul path. So that's where that understanding can come in. But even if we just stick with, the conscious therapy, the jewels that you find on the way to healing that, just by being with someone who is listening and reflecting to you and the learning of yourself, and how, okay, maybe this horrible experience in your childhood meant that you picked terrible relationships in your adulthood, and now you're understanding that and you're able to know that, have that solidity, that already, whether you think of yourself as a soul or not, this is now an opportunity, because you have done the work, the work of going into yourself, of questioning yourself, of questioning your choices and seeing them as such, seeing them as choices. That's a tough one. That's a tough one for people to swallow. But once you can do that, you start reclaiming, first of all, parts of yourself. You get out of this victim consciousness, right? Because again, there are choices that have been made unconsciously, yes, but they're driving your life. So once you're bringing some of this up, you are able to make better choices. You are able to have better relationships. You are able to parent better. You are able to forgive the unforgivable. In some cases, you are able to forgive parents that have been long gone or any other kind of perpetrator. I mean, this is an internal job, and it is to live a fuller life. Actually, I had a conversation with someone yesterday about this, and it was an interesting point because, we were kind of talking about people who seem to be kind of cut off from their emotions, and are they sort of lucky? She was kind of wondering, are they kind of lucky because they don't feel, they're kind of even keel, they function and they don't worry about so much. And I kind of sort of thought about that, and I said, when I think of my clients, some of them have said that suicidality, feeling suicidal, has at least been a feeling, and that the absolute worst part of their depression has been that they're numb. When they're numb, they can't think, they can't emote, they can't nothing. So in many ways, the person that lives in that sliver of life that maybe is not so painful, but is also not so joyful. Their capacity is limited. So yes, you're sort of living in this, we've got the entire light spectrum, but you're choosing to only live in yellow. I don't know. Everything's yellow, so it's fine, but or you're choosing to taste one facet, but you can't have all of the flavors. So it's functional, but it's not living. Is that really how you want to choose to live your life? And it comes from fear anyways, by and large. Why have you restricted yourself to this range? Is because this is really scary. The ebbs and flows of life are scary. So yeah.
It is, by the way. And I was actually someone that did live in that sliver for sure, for a long time. I didn't want to feel too much. So it was like, okay, let me control how much I'm going to feel at both ends of the spectrum. So I'm not going to feel too joyful, because if I feel too joyful, what if that's taken away? And then that's going to be harder to deal with when I feel really low. And then I'm not going to stay too low either, because it's also a very scary place to be when you let things be too dark. But it was interesting because when I embarked on my healing journey, I was told that very early on, like, you try to not feel the extremes of your emotions, and you're meant to feel the full spectrum of everything. And that was where I started to explore my emotions more and like understand them more. And that's been a journey, because I definitely on my spiritual journey started with like the mind, and then I went into like the emotions, and then the physical body and like gut health and all of that. And then the last place I looked into, because of life experiences, which I feel like you and I both share as well, is like womb health stuff, right? Like all of these different issues that were arising and that came up to the surface because I was actually living in the upper chakras, like in the mind, the crown, the intuition, all of that was really strong and really heightened. And then what I really needed to do was come back into my body, back into the womb. And I'm bringing this up as well with you because right now you've been really diving deeply into like your womb health and what that looks like for you, and how that's changing the way that you're also approaching your practice and your clients as well. So if you want to share a little bit about like your journey with your womb health and how that's actually allowing you to be more grounded and more present with everything that you are learning. Because I think something as well that a lot of us experience is that we understand a lot of things conceptually. We understand a lot of things in the mind. Like we can say things like, okay, we should not be a victim, or we should not be people pleasers, or we should not do this, right? Like we know these things on some level, right? And especially if it comes into our awareness in like a therapy session, we're like going around and telling everybody, oh, I'm a people pleaser, and I'm like learning how to not be a people pleaser. But then like putting it into action is a whole other like level, right? That you need to unlock. So that's what I feel it's all about, like why we go down into like our root chakra, especially, is because we need to put into practice all of these things that we conceptualize and understand and embody it more. And not just say, oh, I'm meant to be this, and then in practice not doing any of that.
Yeah, I mean, the word is what you said. It's embodying. And I mean, I think even you and I catch ourselves still being like, I thought I understood that, but then actually today
I fell into
I
that.
had fell into that again. And it's I think we have to accept,
Mm.
and this is again, with a lot of clients that I see, it's like, well, okay, like there seems to be this natural human sort of inclination to feel that everything's going to be linear and you're going to reach the end of this. And then, I don't know, you get a gold star and you're going to feel great and everything. No, it's like, you know, we're going to go up and down all the time. But, what you're saying is, yeah, there are many different portals in to healing. And for everyone, it will be different. And sometimes it is best to start with the mind, right? But embodiment coming into the lower chakras, coming into the body as a vessel, but also as a signaler. So my story is very much like that. So you speak about the womb health, like that's now that it came to me now in this way, and I think it had to, but my whole journey started with the womb. If I'm really honest about it, and I mean, I can go into that.
If you'd like to, yeah, by the way, I did mean to ask you, like, how did you embark on this journey in the first place? So we can go there now for sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, I now that I understand so much more, I know how far back this goes. It goes way, 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 way back, right? But I would say that being diagnosed with endometriosis when I was 21 was a pretty big kickstart. So I was wanting to go to medical school. I had done the whole setup to do that, and I wanted to be a doctor for all the wrong reasons. I was literally like that girl that like probably watched Grey's Anatomy and like
Who didn't want to be a doctor watching Grey's Anatomy? I did too.
Exactly. But I was determined, and I got so much feedback from like, my dad, like, oh, my parents, they really, of course, because why would they not want their daughter to be a doctor? I mean, it's a great job. It's a noble job on top of it. And I really want to help people, and I want, and I want to be a surgeon. I don't want to just be any doctor. I mean, it was just fully ego, like. So by like mercy, I burnt out. Duh.
Yeah.
I burnt out. And then I was diagnosed with endometriosis. I had a pain, and and I had always had, my periods and whatever. They'd always been a mess. I was put on birth control when I was 15, maybe even 14, because of bad periods. And my mom took me to the doctor, to check it out. And I was checked out. Most girls were not going to the gynecologist back then at all. And they just put me on birth control, which is the story that you now hear over and over and over, right? But I bring this up because this was a start of some kind of detachment from that entire center. It's problematic, it's painful, it's messy, it's embarrassing. Actually skip it altogether. Just keep taking the pills. But the problem is I was like sicker on the pills. So anyways, I get diagnosed with endometriosis. It's really bad. And I also didn't know what it was. And it was a female doctor who said to me, well, if it's really bad, we'll just take everything out. And I
Like
start
everything out.
everything out. Yeah. So we'll sterilize you. Worst case.
At 21.
Yes. And it was a female doctor. And I started crying. And she said, I don't know why you're crying. This is the bread and butter of gynecology. I don't even know what that means to this
Like,
day.
meaning that that's how they make money?
Yeah,
Like bread and butter? It seems like it.
I don't know. I don't know. It's like for her, this was just a normal day at the office, I guess. Anyways, I guess it was so severe. And I'm very lucky that, I do have parents that advocate for me a little bit, because I told them, and my dad goes, that's insane. We're not going to let you be sterilized. And I don't even know what any of this means. And they're talking about it as stage 1, 2, 3, 4. It sounds like cancer. I don't know what's going on. But that was the beginning, because I was 21 and I thought I was invincible in every way. So to get this, where I might actually have to forfeit the ability to have children, was so severe to me. I said, what did my body do this whole time? What did I do? Mistrust of my body, everything. So not to go into every little detail, but I was really lucky to find a very good surgeon who was actually Japanese. And that's relevant because when we switched the pill to something else, and they tell you, you have to be on the pill if you have endometriosis. You have to. Otherwise, what? I'll have to have a hysterectomy or something. And I remember telling him, I said, I feel so sick on this pill. I said, I need to come off of it. This was about maybe 2 years later.
Mm.
And he said, yeah, do it. And I was like, what? But I guess because he had this sort of more also the Eastern medicine side to him, he goes, trust your body. He goes, you're healthy enough. It's not the be all end all. He's like, just, there's some diet things you can do.
Mm.
So then I embarked down the holistic route. I tried being vegetarian, being vegan. And that's a whole other can of worms. But I think me asking that of my doctor and saying, I'm so sick, I need to come off of these things. They're poisonous. They feel like poison, was the first time I made a choice. And I was 23. So pretty young to make those choices. Again, at the time too, endometriosis wasn't talked about. I mean, I had to find this doctor in such an obscure way. So at the same time, I had been actually at the age of 23, I'd been in Lebanon.
Yeah, I love that story.
With my ex-partner. And his mom was very unwell, and she had seen this energy healer. And I remember being there, and he was kind of just having coffee with us. And I saw him, and I was like shaking. Literally, his presence to me was like shaking. I don't know. You could see through me, and I don't know what I was thinking.
Yeah, when you're in his presence, by the way, because I see him too, like you literally feel like he can read you completely.
Well, he can. And I think at that time, I didn't know anything about myself. So I'm thinking, what is he seeing? This is terrifying. And I don't know at what stage I just started sobbing at this table. We were having a really light conversation. And I said, I'm just so scared I won't be able to have children. This was in my mind as a real thing. And he said, yes, you will.
Mm.
He goes, yes, you will. He goes, you've got, this and this. I can see some red spikes coming out of your womb. And then that was, I think we had been there in May, and then came back in August. And he turned my whole world upside down. I thought, there's more to this. His whole presence was like an awakening for me. I had never been spiritual. I had never thought about energy, but I just knew this guy had something. So I had to see him when I came back in August. And I had been envisioning what he had said to me. And when I came back into his office, he said, oh, you've done a lot of work. And I was like, oh my God. So I became like completely addicted to this way of thinking, of being. I wanted to find out what is this guy? What is he talking about? Um, and yeah, so I guess this is where it started, where at this time it sort of, the roads went like this, where there was medical issue, but then there was also energetic. Something energetic is happening, something spiritual is happening, something larger that my mind couldn't even perceive up before. Fast forward. You know, I had, ended that long relationship, which again was like a massive rupture because we had been together for about 8 years. It was very sad and it was very destabilizing. But at the very same time, I had gotten into my program at Oxford. So something, and it was also the time of, to talk about like Saturn return and, it is these big breakers. And so I went through with my training, which was, actually, I have kind of skipped over the fact where in 2017, I was so anxious, actually. I was so severely anxious that I ended up finding my therapist. So actually that was the first sort of next portal that I would tag. Anyways, all this to say that the long journey kind of started with this physical symptom. And now, fast forward almost 10 years, I understand that physical symptom was my portal in, right? And it was what was necessary to basically scare me so much into finding another way. And all these other little components kind of came in. They were sort of threads together, and then they sort of just started to come together like this. And it was my psychotherapist who was immensely validating for me, who allowed me to understand what situation I was in. I was in a relationship that was like a cocoon. I mean, we were very, on many levels, very happy together, but we weren't very deep. Because emotionally, I was trying to act something out there. I was trying to extract, I was trying to extract emotional care on a level that I myself didn't understand because I didn't understand my emotions. So this is what you now call attachment cycles or attachment patterns, which is huge at the moment for people. So I don't want to. Again, the story is long.
Thank you for sharing that story, by the way. And I've heard it before, but every time you share it, there's like new layers to it, and it then also makes perfect sense as to why you are on the journey that you're on. And I feel like a lot of times the catalyst for people to embark on their spiritual journeys, or at least to investigate a little bit deeper into their suffering or their pain, whether emotional, mental, or physical, stems from something scary that like freaks them out. In your case, it was clearly something that would freak a lot of women out that do want to have kids and that have that desire at 21 to be told like, go and do this without like a second thought. It's a lot. Like, I feel there has to be a better way of stating these types of things and to like really consider a lot of different factors. And I'm also really grateful that you had found someone else and you were guided towards someone else to like help you out and to put you back on track in a lot of ways, at least for you to not have to go do such an extreme surgery. And you talking about Jad, especially the energy therapist, like, I love him so much. I've also been working with him for so long. And I remember that I also had that fear, by the way, of not being able to have children. And he told me the same thing, by the way. He was like, don't worry, it's going to happen. It's going to come. It's like, when, And it's funny, the date changes sometimes with him. But to talk about also what you're doing right now, because now you are finishing up your master's at Oxford, and you have to write your thesis. And your
Mm-hmm.
thesis is around birth. And you mentioned quite a lot of things that kind of like wrap up into this topic, because you did mention like victim consciousness and how that could, by the way, stem from all the way before you even came into this world, right? Like you came in with that kind of like consciousness. And so you're exploring that also through your womb healing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all of these different things in your life that are leading you towards finishing your master's, and it's opening up yet another portal where you're combining like in a lot of ways like victim consciousness with birth
Mm-hmm.
and what that's leading you into, which perhaps you want to open up about as well. Like, you know, we talk about the past a lot, but there's also a lot of like forward thinking in terms of all of this work that you're doing and opening you up to new worlds and new realms that a lot of people might not feel, yeah, maybe comfortable talking about, or don't know that it exists, or might maybe be a bit skeptical about it.
Mm. Yeah. Well, I mean, uh, it's funny because, you know, we're just talking about attachment,
Hmm.
right? And that this is something that became very clear to me back when I first started seeing my therapist. But we also talked about embodiment, and attachment's it's a very, very deep one. And it's very, very active because attachment is basically how you get love, how you get safety and love. And I think most of us can accept that the inner child, you know, is really running with that template. That I think is not so difficult to conceptualize because we can all remember being on some level a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, and you know, and we can kind of see how these things might formulate. Sometimes it's because, you know, a parent was left the house, but sometimes it can be just something you perceived, you know, your mom, as I think you brought up that example, you got lost at the grocery store one day and you couldn't find your mom, and it was this whole thing in your system. And I think that's the interesting thing about trauma and about this womb healing that I am doing. It is really that somatic experience. It's like a matrix in your whole body. The way you hold yourself, you have no idea, that can come from that experience. And womb healing, I'll kind of explain why it's the womb. That's been my journey. It's not to say that anybody else can't get to this point with something else, with the somatic therapy, with breath work, but as you said before, it's bringing it down into that experience. And it's been the womb for me because I was so cut off, you know, as so many women
I was
are.
gonna say, I would say the majority of people are cut off from
Yes.
that, or are not aware of that power that they hold within themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very powerful force of creation in so many different ways. So, in some ways, maybe it's been cut off on purpose, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For us to not be as connected to our power, our strength, our capabilities of creation in all forms, whether it's bringing a child to life or
Mm-hmm.
our own creative ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I would not be able to sit here and talk to you a couple of years ago because my trust in myself to express and my fear of what that would do, you know, if it I don't know even now. It's not even rational. Like what would happen
Mm.
if I express myself and my knowing or my experience, what's that going to do? It doesn't matter, right? But in me there was something that was really stuck, and through doing this, so basically it's almost like a hypnotic meditative experience of really going back, but by connecting through my intuition, you know, the womb center as a powerful, powerful intuitive center, I've started to finally take all of those insights that I would get and actually, it's real. I can trust this. I'm going to
Mm.
follow this instinct, intuitive hit and see what comes of it. And actually, what's come of it has been insane. I mean,
Yeah,
and now
you've
we're
opened up past lives.
past lives.
You've opened up spirit babies.
spirit babies. So the spirit babies, I will get to it because without this trust in what I see, what I dream, what I feel, without even understanding what I'm feeling, and that it's a somatic, it's a full body knowing of something. And that is the feminine, right? We're not talking about this anymore. This has its place, but it's not this. This is different, right? It's through that finally I would have dreams of this little girl coming in. And I finally said, it's the same girl. She's kind of 18 months here and she's 2 years over here. And what is this? Okay. And understanding that this is actually my child. Now, I would have never acknowledged her before. It would have just been a baby, or it would have been me. Or I remember telling my therapist about it, right? And she goes, well, of course, it's just you. I said, no, it's not. I'm sorry. It's not. And the significance of this is not just, oh, that's really cool. The significance is actually a lot greater, because by understanding that, first of all, and this is where the spirituality really gets its, not that it gets its significance, but it comes with a different force, is, we are here, we are on a path, we are here to learn, we're here to experience, we're to have this human experience and expand and to heal. And there will be a next generation, and we will maybe be part of that next generation in a next life, or, whatever, we don't know, but we will keep coming around. And so by definition, your child also has been through many different incarnations. So if you think that your baby's just your baby and you don't bother thinking of the larger picture, the trouble with that is, how do you not project onto that little one coming in as an extension of you? How many times do you hear the parent, you're a reflection of me, you're an extension of me, don't do that, don't do this. Sometimes, most of the time, from a really well-meaning place, actually, don't wear that, it's going to do this, all from your own life experience. But if you don't respect that, this baby, this soul actually comes with their own stuff and their own agenda. Again, it can be more ego-led. I mean, this is, that victim consciousness can then be transmitted onto them. And that's how things become intergenerational. And if you talk about my thesis, my curiosity has been around birth and how that can, lead into how someone experiences the rest of their life. What is constellated at that time? And it's bigger than just their labor, it's also about, what is this child to its environment? What is the relationship there? So I guess bringing it together, I would say, it's an opportunity. If this is where you're at and you want to look into the next generation and what they're really here to do, is there a way for you to basically work on yourself, heal yourself enough to have the awareness that you are not owning this child? It's coming through your body. It's coming out of you into life, and it's your job to nurture and nourish and to protect that child. But it is not your job to tell it how it should be. It's, you sent me that amazing poem today.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite poems by Khalil Gibran, and I love it so much. And it was something that I would repeat to my parents all the time, especially as I was transitioning from moving away from the corporate world and like figuring out things by myself and wanting to release the conditionings that I was born into and to free myself from the cycles and the patterns that I had seen and recognized very early on as non-sustainable patterns that were just going to inflict more pain and more suffering, and we weren't going to evolve as a human race if we kept just repeating these cycles. And I remember when I started to dig into this, I had someone read my soul contract. And a soul contract, talking about spirit babies, is something that a soul would agree to in terms of like what karmas would you have and like what your purpose is and what your gifts and talents are. And I remember he told me something along the lines of, you're really here to question every single belief system that your parents gave you. Like every single one. You're here to like turn it all, upside down. I was like, oh my God, that's like pretty scary, because there's like a lot of stuff that we know of already. But then how many things are we unaware of that have been transmitted to us by our parents and by our grandparents and our great grandparents? Like, we are affected by 7 generations that come after us. So of course, the work that we're doing today is going to affect the 7 generations that come after us as well. And the role of a parent, and according to that poem that we both love, is to see that child as a life force of their own. And you said this to me today, and I love it. It's like they're their own sovereign beings with their own authority, here to experience their own life. Now, yes, of course, when they're babies, they obviously, especially the first 6 months, the child doesn't even know that it's separate from the mother. It really feels at one with the mom. Yes or no?
No, so this is what's
No,
being.
that's what's coming up for you. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot out there about babies, and I think what's fascinating is, for example, there was a report that just came out from the NHS about birth trauma, but it was actually the mother's experiences of horrible experiences at the hospital. But there is sort of this understanding that the baby won't remember, or it's not separate. And when you start doing this work, and like sort of the regressive work, you start to understand that you came in with a lot of knowledge, and actually you're still very connected to that other realm.
Yeah, I mean,
early
babies are the
on.
closest to heaven, right?
Right.
Because they just came from that space.
They just came from there. Even during gestation, they kind of are in and out.
Yes, that's true.
Of
Apparently
their
the soul
bodies.
doesn't land in until what, month 4, 5?
Later.
Even later?
Later, yeah.
Okay.
So it's I don't know, this part to me, and as you know, this part to me is newer. This is newest.
This is newest. I mean, over the last year, I would say this like probably really started 7, 8 months ago.
Yeah, about 6, 7 for me. It's been that I actually bought it and started running with it.
I mean, I'm sure like people listening might be like, oh wait, what are they talking about? Spirit babies, what? But I have to say, I have some friends that have spoken to me about it, and they are spiritual, but they're not necessarily on that path. But I have a friend of mine, she has her first baby already, and she was telling me, but I need to have my second. Like, I know that there's a second baby, and she's been around even before this baby came. And I don't know, like the boy decided to come before her, but I need to have my daughter. And she was feeling a bit panicky about it, by the way, because it almost felt like she was delaying her arrival because other things needed to be in place, and it wasn't the right time for her to come earthside. And I remember telling her, like, she's just letting you know. She's just letting you know she's there. And she trusts that, like, she is going to come when it's meant to happen. Like, you don't feel guilty that it's not happening right away. But it was interesting because she's someone that doesn't necessarily, like, so there are some people that are very much open to that realm.
Well, and that's why I say you can call it spirit baby, but you can also just say this is reincarnation. If you're going to get to that, then, which many, many people are on that, where we reincarnate, we have past lives. People who do have near-death experience, and plant medicine.
Yes, we were going to talk a bit about plant medicine, yes.
But before we even get there, again, if you come in and you choose and you have this, you choose on some level this life as a soul to expand, then by definition, you are choosing your parents. So by definition, you have been chosen as a parent. And what would it be like to really prepare yourself for that role, I guess. I mean, and I'm not saying that you have to do it this way, that you have to, oh my God, you have to talk about spirit. No, but it is also gives a little bit of importance to learning about yourself, not doing this, because it will repeat. And then that's, if we do talk about plant medicine, that for me was a massive tool as well. This is also part of what made this so real for me was, having these, psilocybin journeys, and having my grandmother there, who in life I wasn't really that close to. This is my Cuban side, my mother's side, and my understanding that my endometriosis was actually a result of feminine wounding coming all the way down from that side. And so again, I had this reminder of, that this, first of all, this center needed a lot of attention. It was trying to talk to me. And also that there was a lot of healing needed, not just for me, but for my mother, for her mother. And there was, even I know of very traumatic stories. There's so much trauma around birth, around giving birth, around getting pregnant, about being cast out because you got pregnant, about being disowned or losing a child, having an abortion. These are all themes that even I just know of. And what does that do? What does that do to the mother? What does that do to her feelings about her daughter? And now the daughter has lived that trauma in her body. Now she has a daughter. It's not that difficult to conceptualize. This is why I say sometimes the psychotherapy and the spirituality are just different languages for the same thing. You don't have to necessarily buy it. We're talking about intergenerational trauma. We are talking about incarnation. We are talking about energy. We're talking about multiple planes of reality. We are talking about past lives. Those are all interwoven into this one topic. I guess that's why it can feel overwhelming to talk about or to acknowledge. And also it can be really hard for us to acknowledge that our children can be in pain or can be harmed by something that we have unconsciously passed down. That's really hard to contend with because there's so much love in that space as well.
And at the same time, though, perhaps the soul chose that experience as well, right? Like, since we talked about how we chose our parents and we chose certain things, and there are things that we came into to learn from. So even if as parents sometimes, and we know that like some parents might not necessarily, you have parents that do everything right and their kids can still have trauma and still not do well in life. And you have parents that have, like, let's say, messed up in every area, and they have like the most brilliant children. So I feel like, especially for us, because we are on this path and we are on this journey, obviously the way that we're going to be approaching this is very different. But I feel like it's also thanks to the path that we've been on and the things that had happened and the things that had catalyzed us in so many different ways. And so ultimately it's almost like, yeah, it is what it is.
I think what we are talking, or what I'm talking about, and this is now from my direct life experience now, is I suppose another angle to think about some of this is, there's a lot out there about like shadow work. And as you connect in with the womb space, but men can do this too. This is not gender specific at all. This is, as you connect in more with yourself, let's say as you bring that mind down into the body, you will be confronted with ugly, and you will continuously be confronted with ugly. And it's that is part of this. The shadow work is just, about becoming whole. And that can feel like a really obscure concept. But the stuff that we block with shame being probably one of the biggest ones, because it's like, it's that feeling. You can even feel the emotion of shame in your body. It's like, don't touch that. Don't go there. Keep that away, or project it out onto everyone. Project it out onto your wife. Project it out onto your friend. This is what we do. We fracture. And the act of reclaiming that and understanding you're ugly, I'm jealous. I'm super jealous all the time, or I'm,
Yeah. We spoke about this as well because we realized when we did a lot of that internal work, our own shadows, and how they're not always pleasant necessarily to admit that we contain those traits that we sometimes judge others for. Like, we talk about, oh, like this friend is jealous or this friend is that, without recognizing that that is also something that we experience because we want to deny it, we want to hide it. But I would say more so than calling it like ugly or bad or all of these words, I would say more like it's part of the human experience to go through these things. And how do we integrate these parts of ourselves? And instead of like denying that they're there, I feel like for me, shadow work has really been like an integration so that I may contain all aspects of my humanity within myself, which can sometimes, you were talking about shame and you're like, where do you feel in your body? And I kind of like was scanning my body. I was like, oh, it's interesting. I don't feel it in the same ways that I did before. And that means as well that, yes, the density of the shame has reduced over time for sure with everything. However, of course, an experience can happen and I could feel it again on some level, but it's just not going to feel as intense. And what I'm trying to just share is like, it's not like an ugly or a bad. It's just, again, it just is part of what I came here to experience in a lot of ways, but it doesn't mean that I need to keep choosing it or experiencing it. And there are ways to break free from these things.
Well, yeah, but I think lessen that trigger, lessen the heat on it, and, I guess the reason that in a way I kind of like ugly is not because I'm judging it as good and bad, because we do that all the time, right? Everything is black and white, good, bad. Ugly is just like, I can embrace that I don't look good right now. I look, this is a bad look for me, and just sort of, but that's okay. It almost gives you, there's a power to it once you say, sometimes I don't look so good. And I think just to tie this into what we were talking about, it's this opening up, it's taking that sliver and opening it up to all facets of ourselves that we can, reclaim pieces of take that projection back, take it back slowly, understand and accept really ourselves so that, we don't do that, or we're more conscious of it when we have a child or when we have a relationship. Forget children for the minute, when we have friendships, so we can really engage on all levels. You cannot, this was sort of my point about attachment. It's really hard to engage with the world. I mean, period. With your environment, with the collective, with your boyfriend, with your friend, with your parents. It's really, really difficult if you don't accept these facets in yourself. You will be triggered all the time by everything, and you will feel like a victim, even if you're hiding behind, being the fixer, being the good girl. I mean, these are all just roles, and it's not the full picture. And how beautiful is it to really feel your full picture and be able to enter a relationship and say, sometimes I'm a jealous freak and I'm not going to hide it, because it's just part of me and it will come out. And the likelihood is actually that you won't feel that way very often. And again, when it comes to this next generation coming in, wouldn't it be beautiful to, you know, be able to, again, to reclaim some of those pieces and really allow that being to be what it came, he or she came here to be? What would that be like for them to have, okay, we're not going to be perfect. We're not. We even talked about this today, right? You're driven to keep that child safe, and sometimes that's going to activate a lot of stuff. But to be able to recognize when that's happening and, make adjustments or apologize. Like, how many children just needed to be acknowledged and apologized to, instead of the parents saying, okay, well, he won't remember this anyways, so I'll just move on.
Yeah. It's interesting because I have to say, like, I was very young when my dad apologized to me over something. I think I was like 3 or 4, and I still remember the moment. So I do remember when a parent of mine apologized to me, and it stuck with me. So kids do remember a lot. Like, I know that I have pretty good memories with my childhood, but that was a memory that stuck with me when he did do that. And I just felt that made me feel safe in a lot of ways. Like, he would be able to own up to what had been done and choose differently going forwards, and then stick to his word. And what I did want to just finish off with is, because you brought up plant medicine, that you have a retreat coming up where people get to like work with you intimately as well. And that is happening in October, right?
Yes.
In Portugal and Comporta. So that's super exciting for people that want to explore more of this.
So, I guess it goes together with what you talked about with embodiment, right? I don't want to call it a shortcut, but it is a tool that has risen, right, in people's consciousness quite a bit in the last couple of years. But it requires a lot of preparation. It requires a lot of respect. There's a lot being used with this medicine that is recreational and fun, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, this is a different approach, but it's a safe container. You have to have that safety for you to deep dive. This goes for everything, right? You have to have this level of safety in the therapy room with the coach, with with any plant medicine, with any kind of somatic anything, for you to relax your nervous system and start to inquire. You need safety. So what we try to do is create that womb, literally, as much as possible, so that you're able to let go and go in there, and then help you unpack it after. Because I don't know how many people that do, I don't know, 30 ayahuasca ceremonies, and they want to do mushrooms, every time they go, I don't know, to the beach, or they go to nature. Yeah, they have to do this mushroom, and but you're not integrating. You're getting messages for sure, but where are you embodying them? And it's a missed opportunity. So
it really is. I remember my first plant medicine ceremony. Someone told me that she had done like 100 ayahuasca ceremonies. And I was like, if I do 100 ayahuasca ceremonies, I better walk on water. Like, I'm not going to go through that and like not fly,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
It's integration is really, really necessary. And what I love about the work and the way that you host these retreats is that there is work that you do before you go there. And then there's also work that you're going to be doing after, which is super important, because the work is not just in the ceremony itself and like the messages that you get, that you are basically, a force of creation, but that like you're able to properly then put it into action and properly, feel whole again. Like, that's the purpose of all of the work that we're doing, like you said, is to come back into the fullness of who we are, and that we contain everything, and the good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful, all of that within us. And so that's a very special thing too. I really, really enjoyed this so much, as usual. and it felt like an extended version of our mini podcasts and mini voice notes. But thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your grace, your voice. And it makes me so happy to like see you share that in such an authentic way. So thank you.
Thank you. I wouldn't have been able to do it without the safety of someone like you, I think. It really, and our friendship has been so huge
It really
for me
has.
to externalize some of this instead of just thinking about it all day.
Yeah, I know. And now look, you did it so effortlessly. It just flowed. Really, it did.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
happy. I could talk to you for hours.
know.
And I will continue.
Well,
but let's get some food.
We'll get some food and we'll continue this, I'm sure,
Nice.
6 months from now or something.
I love it.
Thank you.
Thank you, my love.